My son looked me in the eye and said, "This house, the land, the birds, the money, it's all mine now. You should find somewhere else to rot." I had raised him, built that farm with my own hands, and suddenly I was standing in the rain, holding a suitcase, watching my name disappear from every document. But the thing about betrayal is, it doesn't just hurt, it sharpens you. So when he sat on his throne of stolen feathers, he never expected the storm coming from me. Do you want to see what a mother looks like when she stops being silent? The wind smelled like wet feathers and burnt hay that morning, and still, I roasted that turkey myself. Got up at 5, basted it 3 times, set the table, laid out the good napkins. My hands shook a little when I poured the cider, but not because of age. I think I knew something was about to snap. He brought the whole show with him. Michael. His wife Cheryl in her fur-collared coat, even though it wasn't that cold. Their daughter Emma with her ballet flats covered in barn dust. And 2 real estate men I'd never seen before. Suits in a chicken yard. Imagine that. Michael barely looked at me, just nodded like I was the housekeeper. He walked in with that confident stride of someone who believed he owned the earth he stepped on. And maybe he did. At least, that's what he thought. We hadn't even finished grace when he stood up, raised a wine glass like some kind of king and said it. That one line that broke something in me. As of this morning, the estate has been fully transferred. The house, the land, the business. Everything Dad left. It's all officially mine now. Mum, you're welcome to stay through the weekend, but we've already started packing your things. I remember my fork slipping off the plate. Not falling, just gliding, like even it didn't want to be there anymore. Cheryl smiled, a quiet, polite smile that said everything was going exactly how she planned. Emma looked down at her plate, then back at me, wide-eyed. I didn't speak, not because I had no words, but because if I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure I'd stop. He passed me a manila envelope. Thick, neatly labeled, my name on it, in Cheryl's handwriting. Inside were the copies of what they claimed was the will. New documents, legal, slick, final. Michael kept going, like he was presenting a new product. "It just makes sense, Mum. You're 71. The upkeep, the taxes, the workload. You've done enough. Time to step back. Enjoy life in town. Clara said she'd help you find a place. Something smaller. Manageable." He actually said manageable. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had raised chickens, signed off on feed deliveries, kept this place afloat after my husband passed. The same hands that had buried that man under the oak tree out back just 6 months ago. Michael poured himself more cider. "You'll love it, really. No more noisy coops, no more mud, no more waking up at 4 to check the incubators. You'll be free. Free." I almost laughed. Free of my life, my land, my identity. Free of being inconvenient. Emma leaned toward me, almost in a whisper. "Grandma, I didn't know they were going to do this today." I didn't answer her, not because I didn't want to, but because in that moment, I wasn't anybody's grandma. I was just a woman being erased. I pushed back my chair. The sound of it scraped across the floor harder than I meant, but I didn't care. I looked Michael in the eye. That same boy I'd rocked to sleep during a tornado watch in '89. That same boy who cried when his first hen died. And I said one word. "All right." Then I stood, walked to the kitchen, took off my apron, folded it slow, set it on the counter, picked up my purse, the coat I always hung by the door, and I walked out. Behind me, no one said a word. Not Michael, not Cheryl, not even Emma. The gravel crunched beneath my feet. The wind pulled at my collar. The air smelled sharper than before. cleaner. I didn't have a plan. Not yet. Just motion. Just steps. Just distance between me and that house. Let me tell you something. Betrayal has a sound. It's not loud. It's not a scream. It's quiet, polished, dressed in your son's best button-up, poured into a glass with grace. I left that house with nothing but the clothes on my back and a name they thought they'd already deleted. But I wasn't gone. I was starting. If you're still here, still listening, thank you. Some of you have been through this, some of you will. And if you do, remember this: no matter what papers they wave in your face, no matter what tone they use, you are not finished. You are just rewriting the ending. I didn't go to a motel. I didn't wander around the streets waiting for a sign. I knew exactly where I needed to go. Clara lived 10 miles out, closer to the river. Her place sat on a sloped patch of land, cluttered with wind chimes and potted herbs that always looked like they'd just been watered. The kind of house that smelled like soup before you even opened the door. We hadn't seen each other in a few months, not since my husband's memorial. But I hadn't called ahead. I didn't need to. The porch light was on when I got there. I stood there for a moment, fists clenched in my coat pockets, unsure what to say. Then the door opened. She didn't say a word, just pulled me in, wrapped her arms around me and held on. When she finally stepped back, she looked me over and nodded once, like she'd already guessed everything before I said it. I didn't need to explain. Clara had raised 4 kids of her own. Buried one. Buried a husband, too. She had the kind of face that didn't flinch at wreckage. She made up the guest bed in the little back room with the quilt I'd given her years ago. Said nothing when I left my shoes neatly by the door like a visitor. Just pressed a mug of hot tea into my hand and sat beside me in silence until my hands stopped shaking. The next morning, I woke early. Not from habit. From something heavier. Like my body hadn't yet caught up to what my mind already knew. I found Clara in the kitchen, already dressed, the radio low in the background. She slid a plate of toast and eggs toward me and sat down across the table. I told her everything. I said it plain. No tears, no gasps. Just the facts. The envelope, the signatures, the lawyer's name I didn't recognize. The way Cheryl handed me the keys like she was handing off a rental car. Clara listened, didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she leaned back, crossed her arms and said, "You need to call Harold." Harold Denton had handled our land paperwork for decades. He was one of the last men I knew who still wore suspenders without irony and kept every receipt in a labeled envelope. My husband had trusted him. So had I. I said I didn't know if he was still practicing. Clara was already dialing. Of course he was. 2 hours later, we were in Harold's office. Same building, same smell. That old combination of legal pads and stale coffee. He blinked twice when he saw me, stood up too fast, and said, "I was wondering when you'd show up." Harold didn't need long to understand. He asked to see the documents Michael had given me. I handed him the folder. He flipped through it with the patience of a man who had seen worse. After a few minutes, he closed the file, placed it gently on his desk, and looked at me like a surgeon about to deliver a diagnosis. "This is nonsense." I felt something rise in my chest. Not relief. Not yet. Just the first crack in the weight I'd been carrying. Harold stood, went to a cabinet, pulled a thick brown file. Inside was the original will. My husband's handwriting. His signature. Witnessed. Stamped. Dated 5 months before he passed. He read aloud. "I leave to my beloved wife, Dorothy Hensley, the primary residence, all agricultural assets, and 75% of all financial holdings, as outlined in Appendix B." Then he flipped the page. I leave to my son, Michael Hensley, the remaining assets, totaling approximately $6 million, contingent upon his ongoing care and support of his mother. Harold stopped there. That word, contingent, it echoed like thunder in a quiet room. He leaned forward. Michael's claim is fraudulent. If he submitted a revised will, it's forged or outdated. You, Dorothy, are the primary heir, not only to the farm, but to nearly everything else. I didn't speak, not because I was shocked, but because something deeper was shifting, something hard, final. Harold continued. I'm filing for an immediate injunction to freeze all transactions tied to the estate. We'll contact the county clerk, the bank, and the property assessor. By end of day, Michael won't be able to lift a feather on that land without facing consequences. I looked out the office window. The sky was dull, heavy with clouds, but I felt something clearing inside me. Not joy, not vengeance, just clarity. Harold glanced down at the papers again. And Dorothy, there's something else. He slid a small envelope across the table. My name on it, my husband's handwriting. He said he wrote this the day he signed the new will, asked me to keep it sealed unless this kind of thing happened. I never thought I'd actually need it. I took the envelope, but didn't open it. Not yet. Not there. Clara touched my arm, gently. We'll handle this. You're not alone. And for the first time in 24 hours, I believed her. I didn't cry in Harold's office. I didn't cry on the ride home either. Clara offered to drive, and I let her. Not because I couldn't, but because I needed to sit still and think. The envelope sat heavy in my lap, my name in my husband's handwriting, a quiet, curved D that had appeared on every birthday card and tax return for 47 years. I didn't open it at Harold's. That moment needed to be mine, alone. Back at Clara's, I went to the guest room, shut the door, and sat on the bed. The edges of the envelope were soft, slightly yellowed from time. I slid my thumb under the seal and unfolded the letter. The writing was neat, slower than it used to be. He'd taken his time. Dorothy, if you're reading this, it means Michael did exactly what I feared. You always saw the good in him. I saw the cracks. I rewrote the will because I didn't trust Cheryl. And I didn't trust what Michael becomes when she pushes hard enough. You were the one who kept this family standing. You made this land a home. I built the business, but you built the roots. Don't let them steal it. Not just because it's yours, but because it's the only way to remind them who you are. You don't need revenge. You just need the truth to walk into the light. That's all. I love you. Always. Jack. I sat with the letter in my hands for a long time, not reading it again, just holding it. Then I folded it, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into my coat pocket. Not for safekeeping, for carrying, like armor. That night, Harold called. He'd filed the injunction. The judge signed it within the hour. The estate was legally frozen. All transfers, all sales, all changes to ownership or control, blocked. Michael would learn soon enough. I didn't sleep much, but it wasn't dread that kept me up. It was direction. I was no longer guessing, no longer surviving. I was planning. The next morning, Clara made coffee. I told her I was going back to the farm. She blinked once, then nodded. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. She just handed me her car keys and said, "Take the silver one. The brakes are better." I drove in silence. The road was familiar, but felt different, as if something had tilted overnight and refused to tilt back. When I pulled up to the house, Cheryl's car was gone. Michael's truck was parked at an angle like he was in too much of a hurry to straighten it. The front porch light was still on, even in daylight. I didn't knock. I walked straight to the barn. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of hay, manure, and feathers. The sounds were the same: the soft rustle of birds, the distant clatter of feed buckets. But something else was there too: a tension, like the building itself knew it wasn't in the right hands. Michael was at the far end of the main corridor, crouched by the incubators. He looked up when he heard my steps. Surprise flickered across his face, then faded into something harder. "What are you doing here, Mum?" I didn't answer right away. I walked closer, slowly, until I could see the sweat on his neck. "I came to let you know the estate has been frozen. All legal transfers are suspended. You'll receive notice by this afternoon." He straightened, jaw tightening. His hand twitched like he wanted to throw something but didn't. "You went to Harold?" I nodded. He shook his head and laughed under his breath. "You're unbelievable." I said nothing. Michael moved toward me. Not fast, not aggressive, just deliberate. "You're making a mistake. This isn't how this was supposed to go. Cheryl and I had plans. We were going to modernize the operations, expand distribution, turn the barn into a processing facility. Real money, not just small-town feed store nonsense." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw something I hadn't let myself see before. Not anger, not greed, but desperation. Michael didn't want to run the farm. He wanted to flip it, turn it into something else, something flashier, faster, something that looked better on a spreadsheet. "I didn't raise you for this." He flinched. "You're 71. You can't keep up. We're trying to give you an out. You mean erase me with a smile?" He stepped back. "This is just business, Mum." No, this was my life. That house, that land, that barn. I buried your father with my own hands beneath that oak tree because he asked me to. I raised you under this roof, and you stood there at Thanksgiving and handed me an envelope like I was a liability." Michael didn't respond. He looked away, jaw working. And I saw it again. The crack. The place where whatever story he'd told himself was starting to fail. I turned to leave. "You'll be hearing from the court." I walked back through the yard, past the coop, past the gate, and down the gravel drive. I didn't look back, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't need to. Back at Clara's, Harold was already waiting in the kitchen with a folder in his hand. The county clerk confirmed. All titles and bank accounts are under injunction. And Dorothy, I pulled something else. He opened the folder and slid out a contract. Michael had signed an agreement with a poultry distributor 3 weeks ago, a large one. He had promised 500 birds for commercial processing at a price 3 times above market. The problem is, the contract listed him as sole owner. Forgery. Fraud. Harold didn't smile. He just nodded once, firm. "We'll escalate this." And so it began. I had picked my battlefield. And Michael, for all his planning, never saw the fire coming from me. The invitation was mailed out a week earlier. Autumn Producers Roundtable, hosted by the Hensley Farm, sponsored by Middleton County Agricultural Council. Guest speaker, Michael Hensley. Topic: Scaling small farms for big market success. I didn't need to be on the guest list. I'd been on the council for years. Before Michael ever knew what a crop yield was. Before Cheryl started wearing boots just for show. Harold and I agreed. That event would be the right time, the right room, and the right audience. A room full of farmers, local officials, and press from the County Ag Journal. It wasn't just about timing, it was about impact. The day of the round table, Clara pressed my blazer and laid out a pair of leather shoes I hadn't worn since Jack's memorial. I tied my hair up, no makeup, no jewelry, just presence. Harold met me in the parking lot. He looked tired but focused, a file tucked under his arm, suit wrinkled in a way that said he had been too busy to care. I nodded to him once and walked inside. The venue was a conference hall at the Middleton Civic Centre. Long tables, white tablecloths, scattered vases with dried wheat stalks. People were already seated. Coffee urns hissed in the back corner. I scanned the room. I saw some old faces, neighbours from nearby farms. Some nodded, some avoided my eyes. Whispers moved faster than facts in small towns. Then I saw him, Michael, at the head of the table, wearing a pressed shirt and a smug kind of calm. Cheryl wasn't with him, probably saving face in some boutique miles away. A councilwoman stepped up to the podium. She tapped the mic and smiled. A short welcome, some opening remarks. Then she introduced Michael. His name was met with polite applause. He stood and launched right into his pitch. Slides clicked on the screen behind him. Charts, projections, growth rates. He spoke confidently, talking about efficiency, about strategy, about leadership transition in family-owned farms. My name was not mentioned, not once. Then he got to the last slide, the farm logo, my logo, still stitched into the aprons I sewed by hand years ago, still etched into the barn door. He stood there, smiling like he'd built it with his own 2 hands. The applause started, and that was my cue. I stood up slowly, walked to the front of the room. All eyes turned. Michael's face stiffened, then froze. I reached the podium without a word, turned to face the room. My name is Dorothy Hensley. I am the founder of Hensley Farm. Silence fell. You could hear the air shift. What you just heard was a performance. My son is not the owner of the Hensley property. He is not the legal controller of its assets. And the documents he has used to present otherwise are fraudulent. There were a few gasps. One man in the back dropped his pen. Harold stepped forward and laid the legal folder on the table. As of 2 days ago, by court order, all estate activity has been frozen. Michael Hensley is under investigation for attempted fraudulent transfer of property and misrepresentation of ownership in a commercial setting. Michael tried to speak, tried to raise his hand. I kept going. This farm was built over 4 decades, through rain, loss, grit, and sacrifice. I buried my husband on that land. I built that brand. I handled every contract, every livestock tag, every broken fence post. I paused. Let it sink. Michael looked pale now. He shifted behind the table, fingers clenched tight. I turned back to the room. Some of you in here know me. Some of you sat at our table, ate our birds, sold us your feed. This man you just applauded tried to erase me from what I spent a lifetime building. Harold stepped beside me and opened the folder. Here is the original will, signed, notarized, filed with the county. It names Mrs. Hensley as the primary heir of all agricultural and residential assets. Any document claiming otherwise is null and void. Whispers turned to murmurs, chairs scraped the floor. People looked at Michael, then back at me. I looked at my son. You didn't just steal, Michael, you tried to do it with style. You practiced the script, you suited up, you smiled and posed and made people believe you were born ready for the crown. But you forgot one thing. I built the kingdom. And then I walked off the stage. Michael didn't follow. He didn't speak. He didn't even pack up his materials. Just stood there, frozen, as Harold handed out copies of the injunction to the council leaders. Outside, the air hit cooler than I expected. Clara was waiting by the door. She handed me my coat without a word. In the car, we said nothing. There was nothing to say. Back at her house, I sat at the kitchen table while Harold went over next steps. He was making calls, pushing the investigation forward. The poultry distributor had already responded. Their legal team was requesting a statement. They wanted to know if Michael's contract was enforceable. It wasn't. His accounts were being reviewed. Any attempt to withdraw funds under the name of Hensley Farm would be flagged. Harold said the storm had started, and now it had momentum. I sat with my tea, stared at the wood grain in the table, thought about the silence in that conference room after my last sentence. Not everything needed yelling. Some things just needed to be said plainly. And that was the moment I took back what was mine. Not by force, but by standing still while my son collapsed under the weight of his own pretense. By the time the sun came up the next morning, the silence had turned cold. I stood in Clara's kitchen with my hands wrapped around a mug of weak coffee, watching the wind move through her backyard like it was clearing space for something new. Her house always felt still, but now it felt sharp, like something had shifted in the air, something permanent. Harold called just before 7. His voice didn't carry emotion, but I could tell he was moving fast. He said the poultry distributor had officially terminated Michael's contract. They flagged it as a breach. Fraudulent misrepresentation. He used forged documentation to back his claims of sole ownership. That was all they needed. Harold was already coordinating with the county clerk to ensure Michael couldn't reverse anything. Not that it mattered. The bank had been notified. The primary business account was under full review. The branch manager froze it before the system could process any large withdrawals. Payroll stopped. Automatic drafts cancelled. By 9, the first truck pulled up to the farm to repossess the feed storage units Michael had leased in my name. They had my signature on a scanned PDF. I'd never signed anything. Harold said it was textbook, that Michael had been too confident, too fast, that the arrogance always leaves a trail. The second truck came at 10, this one from the insurance carrier. They were conducting a site inspection, trying to confirm details in the new policy Michael had taken out 2 weeks earlier. He'd attempted to insure the property under his name only, anonymously increased coverage by over 30%, likely expecting a payout if anything went wrong. By noon, Cheryl's name showed up in Harold's inbox. Her lawyer had submitted a separation notice. Quiet. Clean. She'd listed irreconcilable betrayal. That was rich, but none of that surprised me. Not even the speed of it. What caught me off guard was the voicemail from Emma's school. The counselor wanted to confirm that Emma would be staying with Cheryl's sister in Ohio until things calmed down. Apparently, Emma had broken down in class. The school had to call someone to pick her up. I didn't listen to the full message. I couldn't. My hand started shaking halfway through, and I just set the phone down and walked outside. Clara found me on the back steps, staring out at the frost collecting along the edges of her herb garden. I hadn't said a word for nearly half an hour. She didn't ask anything, just sat next to me and handed me her coat. Not to wear, just to hold. When I finally spoke, I told her the truth, that winning didn't feel like I thought it would. That watching Michael fall apart this fast felt less like justice and more like watching a house you built burn down with no sound. She said nothing, just sat beside me like a stone. I went back inside and poured myself more coffee I didn't want. Harold arrived just after 1 with a large envelope. He laid it on the table, removed his coat, and opened the file like it weighed more than paper. Inside was a full list of the financial damage: frozen assets, cancelled contracts, potential criminal charges. Cheryl's name had been removed from 3 joint accounts. Michael's credit lines had been locked. His real estate license, still technically active, had been flagged by the ethics board. Harold read the last line. Michael Hensley is now considered a high-risk account holder in 3 banking systems. I sat back in the chair, not shocked, just tired. Harold said the press would pick it up within a day or two, local stations first, then maybe a blip in the regional news. The agriculture community was small, word moved fast, no need to issue a statement. The documents spoke for themselves. I asked Harold if Michael knew the full scope yet. He said probably not. That most men like Michael don't understand. They've lost until the room goes silent around them. I didn't speak again for a while. Then I asked Harold what the next step was. He said there was still the matter of the contingency clause in Jack's will, the one that kicked in if Michael failed to meet his obligation to care for me after Jack's death. Technically, Harold said, by falsifying ownership and evicting me, Michael had violated that clause beyond repair. I asked what that meant in plain terms. Harold said it meant Michael was now fully disinherited, that his 10% would be legally transferred to me within weeks. No challenge possible. He then reached for a second envelope, this one thinner. Inside was a document Jack had signed 6 months before he died. A quiet amendment to the estate. It stated that if Michael attempted to override the original will or engage in fraudulent acts, the 10% would not come back to Dorothy alone. It would go into a public trust fund under her control, a fund reserved for agricultural programs for women over 50. I read the document twice. Harold said Jack came to him in confidence, said he had seen enough signs in Michael to worry. He didn't want the money destroyed. He wanted it repurposed. I didn't cry. I just sat there, holding the file, thinking about how my husband, flawed, proud, secretive as he could be, had chosen to protect me after he was gone. Not just me. Something bigger. Something that could grow. I told Harold I needed time to decide how to proceed. He nodded, said the papers would wait. That night, I walked the length of Clara's yard barefoot. The grass was cold, the air sharper than the night before. The moon was low and orange over the tree line. I walked until I couldn't hear the cars on the road, until the only thing left was my breath and the sound of my feet in the frozen dirt. And in that quiet, I felt something settle. Not peace, not forgiveness, just the beginning of something steady, something that would hold. 2 days after the council meeting, the front page of the Middleton County Journal carried a headline in block letters. Local farming family in legal dispute over inheritance fraud. Underneath it was a picture of Michael, taken at the agricultural round table. His shoulders were square, his smile wide, still frozen in the exact moment before everything around him broke apart. The article didn't name me until the 3rd paragraph. But it didn't have to. Everyone already knew. By mid-morning, my phone had rung 6 times. I didn't answer. Clara let most of the calls go to voicemail. Even Harold held back from calling. We all understood that sometimes silence is not about weakness. Sometimes it's where control lives. Michael didn't call either. Not that day, not the next. But Cheryl did. Her number came up on the screen around noon, and Clara reached for the phone, then paused. I nodded. She answered, kept it short, told Cheryl I wasn't available. Then she hung up and slid the phone across the table. I sat in the same chair I'd used for coffee every morning since I left my house. This time, I was drinking tea. The mug had a small chip in it, but I liked it that way. It reminded me of things that had survived even after being damaged. Later that afternoon, Harold arrived with another envelope. His visits had become predictable. Each one carried a new piece of the aftermath. This time, it was a formal notice. The poultry distributor had filed a complaint against Michael for breach of contract. They were seeking damages for lost product and reputation. It wasn't just a civil issue now. If enough parties filed together, it could become a matter for the district court. Harold laid the paper flat on the table. They're also pursuing a clause that states if any misrepresentation is proven, the violating party can be banned from future contracts for a minimum of 10 years. That would cut Michael off from every regional supplier he's ever worked with. It would mark him not just as reckless, but as untrustworthy. Harold paused. And that kind of stain doesn't fade fast in this community. I nodded once. He said the school board had also requested a background review. Apparently, Michael had been applying for a part-time administrative role to try and keep cash coming in. But now, that application was under review due to pending legal issues. Piece by piece, everything was closing in. Not because I pushed, not because I threatened, but because the system that Michael tried to bend was snapping back into shape, and it was pushing him out. That night, after dinner, I took Jack's old coat from the closet and walked outside. The air smelled like burnt leaves and dry hay. A few stars hung low in the sky, caught in the space between seasons. I walked down Clara's driveway. Her mailbox creaked when the wind passed, and the gravel underfoot reminded me of home. I missed the sound of my own porch steps, the weight of the kitchen door, the familiar rhythm of hens rustling before sleep. But I didn't miss the way I used to shrink into that house. I didn't miss how invisible I'd let myself become under the shadow of people I raised. I sat on the bench beside the road and closed my eyes. Let the night settle. Let the cold remind me I was still alive, still rooted, still here. The next morning, Clara handed me an envelope that had arrived by post. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Emma. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper, lined, slightly wrinkled, the kind she used to scribble on at the kitchen table after school. Grandma, I don't know what is happening, but I miss you. I heard stuff at school. Some kids said mean things about Dad. I know you're not bad. I remember how you taught me how to hold the baby chicks. You said to use 2 hands, even when they wiggle. I hope I see you soon. Love, Emma. I folded the note carefully and slid it into my coat pocket. I didn't say anything. Clara didn't either. We both understood some things don't need commentary. They just need space. By noon, Harold returned with final confirmation. The court had validated the contingency clause in Jack's will. Michael was officially disinherited. The 10% was now mine, and as outlined, transferred into the agricultural trust fund Jack had created under my name. I didn't smile, not from joy, but from something quieter, a kind of anchoring, a return to myself. Harold asked if I wanted to make a public statement. I said no. He asked if I wanted to notify Michael in person. I said no. Then he said something that landed heavy. He knows already. He just hasn't figured out how to face you yet. I nodded. That afternoon, I went into Clara's garden. I dug a small hole with my bare hands near the rosemary bush and planted a few bulbs she'd left over from spring. Nothing fancy, just something to grow. Sometimes that's all you can do. Put something in the ground and wait for it to rise. It was just after 7 in the evening when the knock came. Not rushed, not timid. Just 2 firm knocks, then quiet. Clara and I were sitting at the kitchen table folding laundry. The radio played something old and slow in the background. The knock cut through everything. I knew who it was before I looked up. I stood, walked to the door, opened it. Michael stood there, hands in his coat pockets, eyes dull, jaw tight, like he hadn't slept. His clothes were neat, but wrinkled in places that told me he'd worn them for more than a day. Behind him, the last of the sunlight clung to the tops of the trees. He didn't speak. I didn't either. Not right away. I stepped aside and let him in. He walked with the careful quiet of someone who knew they no longer had the right to move freely. Clara stood without a word and left the room. Just me and him now. He sat at the table where I'd had every conversation with Harold, where I had read Emma's note, where I had unsealed the letter Jack left behind. He looked smaller than I remembered, but maybe it was me who had grown. I didn't sit. He cleared his throat. His voice cracked when he finally used it. Everything's gone. The accounts, the contracts, the truck. Cheryl left, took her name off everything and went to her sister's. He paused, searching my face for something. I gave him nothing. Emma doesn't want to talk to me. She won't answer my messages. Still, I said nothing. He looked down, fumbled with the ring on his finger, took it off, placed it on the table, then looked back at me. I thought I was doing the smart thing. I thought I was protecting the family, building something bigger. My eyes didn't blink. My hands didn't move. But I lied. I lied to the people I loved. I lied to myself. And I hurt you. I waited, not to make him squirm, but because silence sometimes says more than anger. I was raised to believe that you build legacy through ambition, that the ones who push the hardest win, that waiting makes you weak. He stopped, looked down again. But you didn't push. You didn't yell. You didn't curse. You just stayed still and let everything unravel. I walked to the sink, poured a glass of water, sipped it slowly. Then I turned. You did more than lie, Michael. His eyes lifted. You looked me in the face and took what was mine. You smiled while doing it. You handed me an envelope like it was a party favor. You did not protect the family. You tried to erase it. He nodded once, quietly. I don't expect forgiveness. Good. I sat down. My voice was steady. You made choices. You layered those choices with charm and confidence. You used paperwork like weapons. You banked on the idea that I wouldn't fight. And when I did, you folded. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself, just stared at the wood grain of the table like it might open up and swallow him whole. I continued, I want to make something very clear. You are not the man your father wanted to leave this to. That's not an insult. That's the truth. He saw it. Before I did. He warned me. I didn't listen. I believed you would grow into it, that the weight of responsibility would shape you. It didn't. It crushed you. Michael blinked hard. His jaw clenched, but he still didn't speak. I stood again. You are my son, and I will always hold that truth in my bones. But you are no longer part of this legacy. That has been decided. Legally, spiritually, personally. He stood too, slowly. What happens next is not up to me. You will face what comes. I will not interfere. I will not shield. I will not carry this for you. His eyes reddened. But Emma, I cut in. Emma is her own person. If she reaches for you one day, that will be her choice. You lost the right to expect it. He nodded again, this time slower. Like something inside him was breaking in pieces small enough to finally notice. He turned to leave. At the door, he paused. I miss Dad. Every day. I think he would have hated what I became. I didn't correct him. I didn't offer comfort. I let the words settle in the air between us. Then I closed the door behind him. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't write in any journal. I didn't speak to Clara about it. I made myself a cup of tea, sat in the front room, and let the silence stitch itself back into the walls. Sometimes healing doesn't look like warmth. Sometimes it's a cold room you finally know how to sit in. The next morning came in slow and grey, the kind of morning where even the sky seemed undecided. I woke before Clara. sat by the window with a blanket draped over my shoulders, watching the bare branches bend against the wind. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to rush. No roosters, no feed buckets, no checking heat lamps or calculating hatch cycles. Just the hollow quiet of winter closing in and the small, pulsing reminder that I was still here, still standing. Clara came in carrying the mail. She placed a thin stack on the table and poured herself coffee. I sorted through the envelopes absent-mindedly until one caught my eye. It had no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Cheryl. Inside was a single page, no greeting, no signature, just 7 lines written in short, sharp pen strokes. I am not asking for anything. I am not defending what he did. I just want you to know I saw it, all of it, and I let it happen. I thought I was protecting what we built. But the truth is, it was never ours to begin with. I read it twice, then folded it and set it aside. It didn't sting, not the way I expected. It felt more like the closing of a door I had already walked through. By noon, Harold arrived again. He carried with him 2 new forms. The first was an official confirmation from the county recorder's office. My ownership of the farm, the house, and all listed assets had been fully restored. Finalized, non-disputable. The second was a certificate of establishment, the Dorothy Hensley Agricultural Trust. Active, funded, structured to offer microgrants and training programs for women over 50 pursuing late-life farming ventures. Jack's quiet amendment now had a name and a legal body. Harold set the paperwork on the table and said nothing for a while. We both sat in the kind of silence that only happens when a battle is over and there's no need to clean the weapons anymore. He finally spoke. I was wrong to think you wouldn't fight. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Later that afternoon, Clara helped me carry my things to the truck. She moved slower now, one hand on her hip, the other always steady. When I hugged her, I could feel how tightly she held on. Not because she was afraid to let go, but because she knew exactly what it meant to do so. I drove back to the farm as the sky started to dim. The gravel under the tires sounded different, louder. Like the land was clearing its throat, remembering my weight. When I pulled into the driveway, the house stood the same. The porch light still hung slightly crooked. The screen door squeaked on its hinges. The siding could use paint. But it was mine again, entirely. And for the first time in decades, I could feel that truth in my bones. Inside, I walked through each room slowly. The kitchen still smelled faintly of rosemary and wood smoke. The hallway was lined with picture frames, some tilted, some empty. I paused in front of one, Emma at age 7, holding a chick in both hands, her eyes wide and serious like she was cradling the world. Upstairs, the bedroom had been stripped down. No linens, no signs of life. I stood at the edge of the doorway and didn't cross it. Not yet. Instead, I went out back. The coop was still intact. The birds rustled when I approached, then settled again once they recognized the sound of my steps. I stood there, hands on the rail, breathing in the scent of feathers and straw, and I let the silence hold me. That night, I didn't unpack everything. I left some boxes in the truck. I lit the fireplace and sat in the armchair by the window. I made a cup of tea, let it cool beside me, and watched the fire burn low. Around midnight, I opened the bottom drawer of the hallway cabinet, the place Jack used to keep important papers he didn't trust to go anywhere else. Tucked behind a manila folder was a leather-bound notebook I hadn't seen in years. Inside were handwritten notes, soil tests, equipment quotes, seed schedules. But at the back, in Jack's sharp lettering, was a list I had never read. Title: If Dorothy ever takes the farm alone. The list included contacts, a contractor, a vendor in Iowa who sold refurbished equipment, a woman named Nancy who ran a grant program in Missouri, notes on tax credits, a detailed budget with my name at the top. I closed the book and rested my hands on the cover. He had planned for this, not as a punishment, not as a fear, but as a possibility. In the morning, I'd call Nancy. I'd go through the contacts. I'd walk the property line and begin again, on my own terms. But for now, I just sat there, letting the flames crackle and the night press against the windows. The house was quiet, but for the first time it wasn't heavy. It was waiting. The breakfast invitation came folded inside a blue envelope, hand-delivered by a council courier. Middleton Rotary Club, monthly community breakfast. It was nothing formal, just eggs, coffee, and updates about zoning permits or youth scholarships. They'd always held it in the basement of the Methodist church, chairs half filled with familiar faces. I used to bring muffins. Jack would pour coffee. It was quiet, reliable, steady, like a heartbeat. But this time, they listed me as the closing speaker. No one asked, no one explained. They just expected I'd show up and say something. Clara called that morning to check in. I told her I was going, told her I wasn't bringing a speech. I didn't need one. Everything I had to say had been stitched into me over years of silence. I wore the same coat I'd buried Jack in. The hem was coming loose, and I didn't bother fixing it. The church basement smelled like scorched coffee and metal chairs. The tables were lined with plastic flowers and laminated signs. People nodded, smiled too quickly, eyes darting away once I looked back. Michael wasn't there. Neither was Cheryl. I didn't expect them to be. Emma was, sitting between two school volunteers, picking at a biscuit. She looked thinner, older, like she'd stopped smiling in photographs. When it came time, I stood, walked to the front of the room, set my hands on the podium, and waited for the noise to fall away. I didn't begin with a thank you. I began with a name. I am Dorothy Hensley. This land, this name, this work. It did not come to me gently. Some people think legacy is a thing you inherit. A deed, a trust, a business, a house with a history. They think it passes cleanly like a baton. But that's not true. Legacy is not what you're given. It's what you hold on to when everyone around you tells you to let go. My son thought he could reassign my life on paper. He thought if he wore the right shirt and spoke with confidence, no one would question the story. He underestimated what it costs a woman to be invisible for decades and then suddenly not be. I paused. A chair creaked. Someone coughed. When Jack and I built that farm, we had nothing but a loan and a pickup that stalled in the cold. We didn't build it to sell. We didn't build it to impress the bank. We built it to survive. Then we built it to stay. So when someone, no matter how close, tries to take that, they're not just stealing property. They're stealing memory, intention, the blood in the floorboards. And I don't believe in watching quietly when that happens. The room was quiet now, utensils set down, cups untouched. I kept going. What happened to my son is not a tragedy. It's a correction. The system responded because it had to. The community responded because it watched. I responded because if I didn't, I would have been complicit in my own disappearance. I turned slightly toward Emma without calling her name. We raise children to believe in fairness, but we don't always show them what it looks like. I chose to show it now, not when it was easy, but when it mattered. When I finished, I stepped away from the podium, walked back to my seat, and folded my hands in my lap. No one clapped, no one spoke, but no one looked away. After the event ended, People began to trickle out in twos and threes. Some touched my shoulder gently on their way past. Others didn't, and that was fine too. Emma approached last. Her steps were slow, her gaze uncertain. When she stood in front of me, she didn't speak. She just reached into her coat pocket and handed me a folded napkin. Inside was a small, crooked bracelet made of yarn. 2 colors, yellow and blue, her school colors. I took it with both hands. She whispered so soft I barely heard it. I remember what you said about 2 hands. Then she turned and left. I stayed in that seat for a while after the room emptied, listening to the radiator click and the coffee pot hiss. The silence no longer unsettled me. Later that afternoon, I returned to the farm, walked the perimeter, took notes on repairs. A broken hinge on the west gate, a section of fencing leaning after the last storm. I didn't rush. I had time now, and I had authority, not just legal, but lived in, trusted. The mailbox was full when I reached the front porch. Inside, tucked between circulars and seed catalogues, was an envelope from the Department of Agriculture. I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a letter confirming the grant approval for the Agricultural Trust. The fund Jack established had been reviewed, verified, and now recognized by the state. Within 3 months, I would be eligible to begin offering microloans and mentorship to female farmers over 50 across 3 counties. There was also a line item for education partnerships, a community outreach stipend. I folded the letter, pressed it flat, and placed it beside the notebook Jack had left. That night, I walked the upstairs hallway slowly. I stepped into the room that had once belonged to Michael and stood there a long while. The walls were bare, the shelves empty, but the weight was gone. It no longer felt like a wound. It felt like space, and space could be filled with something new. The sky was flat grey that morning, the kind of grey that held no promise of rain, just a quiet ceiling over everything. I opened the front door to let in the cold air and stood for a moment, listening to the wind move through the dry trees. The farm was silent, even the chickens seemed to hold their breath. I had promised myself I wouldn't spend the day looking backward. There was fencing to be repaired and a new shipment of feed arriving. But my mind had other plans. Harold called around 9 and said he would stop by around 11. He didn't say why. He never wasted words, if he could help it. When he pulled up in front of the house, I was already waiting on the porch. He stepped out of the car with a brown envelope under one arm and a folder in the other. His coat was dusted with road salt, and he walked a little slower than usual. Inside, I poured him coffee. He didn't sit right away, just stood by the window, looking out at the pasture like it might offer him answers he didn't yet have. Then he turned. "You need to see this." He slid the folder across the table. I opened it. The top document was a legal statement filed by Michael's attorney, a request for leniency in the upcoming court hearings, citing emotional distress and financial hardship. Harold spoke as I read. He's asking the court to consider his role as a non-violent offender. He's leaning on the fact that no physical harm was done, that restitution has already been made. My eyes didn't leave the paper. He's trying to salvage what's left of his name. Harold nodded once. They're also proposing an early settlement to avoid further litigation. He claims it would help Emma, keep things quieter, easier on her at school. I closed the folder. Not with force. Just enough finality to make it clear I was finished reading. What he wants is for this to disappear quietly, so he can begin reshaping the story, so he can start fresh without carrying the weight of what he did. Harold sat down then, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "It's your call. You don't have to respond. But they want to schedule a mediation. Off record. No press. Just you, him, and legal reps. I let that settle. I didn't speak right away. I stared at the table, at the scratches along its surface. I remembered every dinner Jack and I had shared across it, every late-night cup of tea, every argument and apology. It was where we had built a life out of small, ordinary moments. Finally, I spoke. I'll go, but not to negotiate. Harold didn't ask what I meant. He didn't need to. The meeting was scheduled for 3 days later at a neutral office downtown. I drove myself, wore the same black sweater I'd worn to Jack's memorial. Not out of mourning, but because I didn't want to be distracted by appearances. The room was clean and sterile, long table, 4 chairs, 1 window with frosted glass. Michael sat across from me, his lawyer beside him. Harold sat to my left. Michael looked worse than the last time I saw him. Thinner, paler, like every part of him had been drained of the performance he once wore so easily. The mediator, a soft-voiced woman in a beige blazer, welcomed everyone and laid out the ground rules. Confidential, voluntary, respectful. Michael's lawyer opened with a statement. Words like regret and misunderstanding floated in the air. There was mention of generational strain and misguided decisions. No one said the word fraud. Then Michael spoke. His voice was flat, practiced. I made mistakes. I got overwhelmed. I let fear and pressure control my judgment. I hurt my mother and damaged the family's reputation. I accept that. I said nothing. He continued. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for the chance to begin repairing what I broke. Still, I said nothing. Then the mediator looked to me, asked if I had anything I wished to say. I leaned forward slightly, hands folded. You tried to erase me. You took a life I had built with my bare hands and decided you knew better. You didn't just take money. You didn't just take land. You took breath. You took voice. You replaced it with your signature. Michael looked down. You handed me an envelope and called it kindness. You packed my life into silence and called it efficiency. His lawyer shifted in his chair, but I kept going. What you call fear, I call calculation. What you call pressure, I call choice. You chose to push me out. You chose to lie. You chose to believe that I would go quietly. I stood then, not quickly, just fully. And now you want to skip the consequences. You want a shortcut through accountability. You want to start over without standing in the wreckage long enough to feel it. I picked up my coat. There will be no agreement today. There will be no soft ending. Then I left. Back in the car, I sat for a long while before starting the engine. The sky was beginning to clear. The light outside was cold, but honest. Back at the farm, I found Emma's bracelet still sitting on the table where I had left it. I picked it up, ran my thumb over the yarn. Then I placed it on the windowsill, where the morning light could find it each day. Some truths don't need to be spoken again. They just need to be remembered. The letter came 2 days after I walked out of the mediation room. No envelope, no postage. Just a single page left inside my mailbox, tucked between feed store coupons and a utility bill. I didn't need to see the handwriting to know it was from him. He didn't write, "Dear Mum." He didn't sign, "Love, Michael." It was one of those hollow notes that tried to sound sincere, but avoided every word that carried real weight. He said he respected my decision, that he hoped in time things could be different, and that Emma was asking about me. I folded the letter and threw it into the wood stove without a second thought. It was mid-afternoon when the phone rang. Harold again. I almost didn't pick up. But something in me knew it wasn't about legal papers this time. You might want to sit down, he said. Michael's assets are frozen, and the feds are circling closer than anyone expected. The offshore accounts you flagged with the firm, they were real, and they were dirty. I didn't speak. It's moving fast now. His wife's already been questioned. There's talk of a second round of indictments, not just fraud. Tax evasion, money laundering, the whole pile. I thanked him. Then I stood at the kitchen sink, washing the same mug I'd used that morning, my hands moving slowly, rhythmically, as if they remembered something my heart wasn't quite ready to feel. That night, I cooked myself dinner, not out of hunger, but out of something deeper. I set the table for one, a roast chicken, roasted carrots, and warm bread I'd made earlier that morning. I poured a glass of Jack's favourite red, even though I rarely touched wine anymore. It wasn't a celebration. It wasn't even a victory lap. It was something quieter, a reclaiming of space. The next morning I drove to the old schoolhouse where the town held community meetings. I hadn't been back in years. The hall was mostly empty, save for a few volunteers and a board with upcoming events. I added a notice to the cork wall by the coffee pot. Free skill classes for women over 55. Budgeting, farming, legal basics, free of charge, no registration needed. I didn't put my name on the flyer. I didn't need credit. Back at the farm, I walked the fence line again. The air had shifted. It wasn't just colder, it was sharper, like it carried news on its back. The wind didn't whisper anymore. It declared. By Friday, the local paper carried the headline, "Former city planning advisor under federal investigation, real estate scandal linked to fake trust holdings." A picture of Michael outside a courthouse, his hand shielding his face. I studied it without emotion. Emma came by that afternoon. She didn't say much at first, just hugged me longer than usual. Her eyes were clearer than they had been in weeks. She looked taller somehow. "I saw Dad's picture in the hallway," she said quietly. "I forgot he wore suspenders every day, even with jeans." We both smiled at the memory. Then she pulled something from her coat. A bracelet. Not the yarn one. This one was silver, with her name etched in small cursive letters. She placed it on the table. "For the next time I forget who I am." I didn't cry, not in front of her. I waited until after she left. That night, I wrote my first letter to her. Not a reply, just a beginning. I told her the truth about her father, the truth about how hard he had worked to keep this place alive. I told her about the day he let me sign the final loan document myself, even though it scared me, because he believed I should stand next to him, not behind him. I told her about her own birth, about the first time I held her, and how even then I felt something in her bones that told me she would never be small. I placed the letter in an envelope and tucked it inside the old bread tin on the pantry's top shelf. She would find it someday, when she was ready. The next morning, Michael came. He didn't knock. He didn't storm in. He just stood at the gate, outside the fence, as if he already knew he didn't belong on the land anymore. I stepped onto the porch. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not thinner, just reduced. "Mum, I need—" I raised my hand, not to silence him, but to stop the cycle before it began again. No more performances, no more pleas. He paused. I watched everything fall. I saw the articles. I saw what they said about me, about the accounts, about the fake companies. His voice cracked. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness." I waited. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, for all of it, for the money, for the lies, for throwing you out like you were disposable. I looked at him for a long time. Then I turned, walked back inside and closed the door. I didn't lock it, but I didn't open it again either. Sometimes healing doesn't look like reunion. Sometimes it looks like letting the silence settle, just long enough for both people to hear themselves. That night, I made a fire, sat on the porch with my old boots and a wool blanket Jack had once bought at a roadside stand. I didn't think of vengeance. I didn't think of headlines or trials or justice. I thought about a life rebuilt, one choice at a time, not a second chance, just a real one. I didn't look at the invitation when it first arrived. I let it sit for days, unopened on my kitchen table. Ivory cardstock, gold lettering, my full name printed at the center like it still meant something to him. You are cordially invited to the Griffin Ranch Centennial Celebration. Centennial. The very word used to stir pride now tasted bitter. It had been my life's work, and then it had been the stage for humiliation. But something inside me, not revenge exactly, just resolve, told me I needed to go. Not to reclaim anything, but to let the past see me standing, unbent. The morning of the celebration, I chose to wear blue, not the somber navy I had worn to my husband's funeral. A vibrant blue, like the early morning sky over the pastures. I pinned my hair back, slipped on the silver bracelet my sister gave me when we turned the first profit on our turkey harvest, and walked outside. The air smelled of hay, fresh wood, and something new. My driver, a kind woman named Terry, who'd been working with the non-profit, greeted me with a wide smile and open door. When we pulled up to the ranch, it looked different, cleaned up, flashier, more commercial. There were large signs now, sleek pavilions, and a parking crew. But beneath the gloss, I could still see the bones of the place. My fingerprints in every fence post. People turned when I stepped out. Some nodded, some whispered, and I kept walking. Inside the main barn, turned event hall, there were rows of folding chairs, a platform stage, and banners that read, "Honoring 100 years of Griffin legacy." There he was, my son, slouched in his blazer, hair too carefully tousled, glancing at his phone until he noticed the hush that followed me. He stood, eyes wide, unreadable, then forced a smile. Too slow, too sharp. "Mom," he said through clenched teeth, stepping toward me. I nodded, gave him a look that held no anger, only memory. I walked past him and took my seat in the front row. The event began with music, then a local news anchor reading a brief history of the ranch. None of it was wrong, but none of it felt true. Then they introduced the keynote speaker. To everyone's surprise, it wasn't Owen. It was Alice. Alice, the woman from the board of the Rural Women's Coalition. Calm, poised, but her words cut like glass. This ranch was built not just with sweat and labor, she began, but with the vision and unrecognized genius of a woman who stood through drought, economic collapse, and family betrayal. Today, we don't just celebrate 100 years. We correct the record. She turned toward me. "Mrs. Willa Griffin, would you please join us on stage?" A slow gasp moved through the crowd, like wind through dry grass. I rose, knees steady, breath quiet, and walked up. Alice stepped aside. I stood behind the podium. I was told once that I was too old to be needed, that my time had passed, that a woman like me had no place in what comes next. I paused. But here I am. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was long. Owen didn't clap. He stood, then walked outside. And I knew what would come next. The next morning, I signed the last set of papers. Griffin Ranch was no longer owned by my son. It was now fully transferred to the Griffin Women's Land Stewardship Foundation, an initiative that had already received backing from 3 other major farms and a federal grant for community development. The board had voted. His mismanagement, his tax evasion, his unauthorized construction, it had all come to light. Quietly but firmly, he was removed. He didn't come to the final meeting. He didn't respond to the email from the state board. But that night, he showed up at my door. He didn't knock, just stood there. Shoulders slumped, eyes red, face thinner than I remembered. "I messed up," he said. I waited. I thought I could fix it, make it something bigger, faster. But I broke it. I broke everything. I opened the door wider, told him he could come in. I made tea. We sat in the same chairs that once held our late-night brainstorming sessions. "I know you don't forgive me," he said, not looking up. "I'm not here for that," I replied. He nodded. We talked for hours, not about the ranch, about childhood, about his father, about what it means to lose something you thought you owned. When he left, he didn't ask for anything. No money, no pity. He just said thank you. Later that week, I stood under the barn roof, watching a group of young women measure plots for a new turkey hatchery training program. The air was bright. The land buzzed with quiet, purposeful movement. My name wouldn't be on the deed anymore, but it was everywhere else, in the soil, the beams, the future. That was enough. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever been cast aside by the very ones you raised, tell me. Share your truth in the comments. You're not alone. And if you stayed silent for too long like I did, maybe today is the day you find your voice again. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm still here, still standing. And so are you.